Good evening, good morning, wherever you may be. Streaming to you from the East Coast to the Left Coast and around the world on UCUI.tv. This is All Things Apocalyptic with your host, G. Michael Hopf. Well, hey, how's everybody doing out there listening and on the chat room? I hope you're doing well. I'm doing good. I've been busy. I'm sure hopefully everyone else has been, and if you haven't been, hopefully that's by choice. For me personally, I've just been busy writing away. I'm doing some rewrites on my fourth book, which is due out in early 2015. It will be the fourth book in my 7-book post-apocalyptic series. And then right when those rewrites are done, I'll probably be diving into getting the fifth book, working on that. So I know I kind of get on here and kind of discuss kind of all the crazy stuff that's going around the world, but I think everyone kind of knows all the crazy stuff is still happening. So I'm just going to bypass that because I kind of want to get to our guest here. I'm really, really privileged to have him on, but and it's a departure from the other guests I've already had on. Everybody else it's been pretty much authors, specifically post-apocalyptic authors, that I have on to discuss their books, the apocalyptic events that envelop their characters, and most importantly, the research and advice that they suggest to the listeners out there. Apocalyptic visions are always expressed in several different mediums. This show, by the way, is a medium to tackle and discuss the apocalypse, as are books, as are movies. And I, for one, am a big movie guy. I love movies. I specifically love apocalyptic and dystopian type movies, and I never miss a chance to see one when they come out. I like all different types. They can be gritty and action-packed, even like the old school Mad Max, to thoughtful and riveting, like the movie we're going to be discussing tonight. Movies, I found, are always a very wonderful and a fun medium, and I, for one, don't think I'd like to live in a world if there weren't any. With my books, I spend countless hours and weeks writing, editing, rewriting, and promoting my book. But sometimes, movies definitely go a lot further in the overall production. Not that I'm saying one is greater than the other. In fact, all movies are either based upon a book or written as a screenplay. And a writer is usually always the genesis of it. However, I'm kind of regressing right now. Movies are a very powerful and a beautiful thing and take a filmmaker an incredible amount of time and energy to make. So tonight, I have on an actual screenwriter and filmmaker. Tonight, my guest is Dennis Henley. He has directed 3 feature films, Rock the Bells, Bold Native, and his most the most recent film, Goodbye World, which was an apocalyptic film. He is a critically acclaimed documentary called The Rock of Bells, premiered at the Tribeca Film Festival, and earned comparisons to Gimme Shelter and Woodstock. Bold Native, his first fiction film about Animal Liberation Front, and lastly his most recent film, Goodbye World, which starred Adrian Grenier, Gabby Hoffman, and Ben McKenzie. So that's the film we're going to be talking with Dennis tonight. So Dennis is here to join us to discuss his film, specifically Goodbye World, and to discuss what we do best, all things apocalyptic. Now, I would have him on, but apparently we seem to be having a little technical issue. I had him on here.
I'm back.
Oh, you're there?
Yeah, I somehow got cut off, but I'm back now, man.
Oh, good. Hold on. Let me see if we're all good here. Let me make sure everything is golden. I hate to have the dead air here. Okay, great. So Dennis, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
So I had kind of a little intro, kind of talking about movies, and I absolutely love movies. Absolutely love movies. So when I had a chance to get you on, I'm very, very, very excited about it. Obviously, I'm a writer and deal in novels. But I literally, like I said in my little monologue, I don't know what I would do. I wouldn't want to live in a world without movies. I know that sounds crazy, but I really, really love them. So why don't you introduce yourself? What's that?
That's the worst part of the apocalypse. No more movie theaters.
I was thinking that when I watched Goodbye World, and they were sitting around the table and they're discussing what they would miss. I was thinking, one, I like the coffee thing because I actually even have that in my books where people like talk about how they miss coffee, and I personally would miss Starbucks in some weird way, but I would actually miss movies. I would really miss them. So. So why don't you tell everybody? I know I kind of gave a real quick bio. It's not enough to give you credit in what you've actually achieved. Why don't you tell everyone that's listening about yourself?
Well, I'm from Indiana originally, and wanted to make films since high school, and have been working on it, since I got out of college. And I think you mentioned, I started out doing documentaries, including Tang Clan, and transitioned from that into doing fiction films. Goodbye World is the first kind of larger movie that I've done. Mostly it was a lot of guerrilla type smaller productions up till then. This is still a very, very low budget independent film, but it's a slightly bigger one. I'm talking about society, somebody who is really interested in the way that we interact with each other. This was kind of a fun playground for us to think about, and it's definitely been interesting to see how it's, once you finish a movie, you put it out in the world, it's really no longer yours. It kind of has nothing to do. People are going to read it however they want to, and they're going to bring a lot of themselves to it, and letting go of it is kind of a process. Probably the same way I don't have kids, but I'm sure the same way when kids leave home and go become adults of their own and have experiences, and you get mad at people when they treat your kids badly. It's kind of their own life to live. So that's the phase I'm at with this movie right now, which is it's doing its thing out there, and people are having an opinion, a little to do with me or the movie, but a lot, which has been pretty fascinating. I know that it's shocking to me you're on your fourth book, which is pretty amazing because writing is a challenge. But there's a lot of their own.
Hey, Dennis, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here. Sorry.
You're kind of cutting in and out. I'm not sure if everyone's hearing that on their end too, but you're cutting in and out. Am I cutting in and out to you?
No, you sound great. I'm sorry, it sounds bad. Let me see if I can do anything here. So basically, as I've been talking, it's been cutting in and out?
Yeah. I'm not sure if that's being heard by anyone else listening. Anyway, when you mention as far as you're kind of in that letting go phase, I feel that same way with writing. It's all the arts in a lot of ways, and filmmaking is, I think in writing fiction are kind of part of, or art forms in their own right. They're very subjective to how people receive them. And unless there's like technical issues that are wrong with it, then people bring, you said it perfectly, people bring themselves to whatever they're watching or whatever they're reading. And it is tough kind of, they'll kind of let that go because now it's not yours anymore.
Yeah.
So I know how that feels. I'm with you.
It's interesting, people really, and I don't think this is just people who think about the apocalypse or people who are preparing for the apocalypse. Am I clearer now, or am I cutting out stuff?
Oh, no, you're very, very clear now.
Okay, good. Is prepper a bad word, like in this community? Is that like a pejorative phrase, or do people like the word prepper?
No, I think people embrace that because I think that identifies them and sets them apart. Same thing, and then, there's people that identify themselves as preppers. I think there are people that identify themselves as homesteaders. There are people that define themselves as survivalists. And it's interesting, I think culturally, or even societally, we do that. Why do we give ourselves names?
Right.
But I don't think it's used. I don't think preppers look at themselves and think that it's a bad name. Now, I think that they might think the rest of society thinks it means something that it doesn't.
Right.
So.
Well, it's interesting because there's a lot of people responding to the movie, especially now that it just hit Netflix August 1st, which opens up the audience tremendously. Like 250,000 people have rated it since then, which means that more people have watched it. And so it's hitting a lot of people that don't consider themselves preppers. And it's really interesting how everybody thinks they would be such a Rambo in this circumstance. You know what I mean? They're like, oh, well, these people just don't know what they're doing. And like everyone seems to think that like in any kind of situation where society is breaking down, that they would really just have it all figured out. And they'd just be shooting left and right and killing people. And it would be just like an action movie. And for us, like, I think we felt like eventually it will get to that, sure. But like the first few days, like, you know, people who have like been through earthquakes or situations where society or riots, like in Los Angeles, you know, we read a lot about the way society in general reacted to the riots in LA in '92.
Mm-hmm.
You know, people hole up and they try to like cut themselves off from whatever's going on outside. And not till they're forced to deal with it do they deal with it. And we see that every day. I mean, things are falling apart all the time somewhere on this planet, maybe even in your country, maybe even in your state. There's chaos, there's problems, but we do our best to like isolate ourselves from that. And I think like there's this sort of false mentality when it comes to like collapse events or apocalyptic events where it would be like, there's a distinct moment now where we know everything is completely, you know, it's the SHTF moment. You know, our movie's not about that. It's about like there's a gradual movement towards the SHTF situation during which the majority of people are going to be like, this will all be fine, right? Because we tell ourselves that over and over again every day. This will all be fine, when obviously society is like careening towards something that's going to pull it apart, because that's the way history works, right? And so it's been fascinating to see like the way that people think about these kind of ideas and compare it to reality. And I think that the preppers, or people who actually are conscious about this, the people that you're talking to, the people that might listen to this, have probably thought it out and aren't so fly off the handle. I mean, certainly I think a lot of people who are in the prepper community who've watched the movie are like, this is not a prepper movie, because it obviously is not a manual for people who know anything about how to prepare for apocalyptic events. It is a bunch of people who don't know how to do that, right? So, hey, this is potentially a useful piece of social commentary because it says, hey, this is what happens when you don't prepare. So,
I want to jump in on that because I think that's, you know, when I watch it, that's kind of what I pulled from it. I think, and I've seen comments out there. I've heard people talk about it, and no, it's not. It's not a movie. I mean, you didn't make it that way. You didn't make it a movie that would be kind of a textbook illustration on how you should prep. But I think it is, and it can be. It can scare people to action because it shows what happens when you're not prepared. Yeah. But I don't even know if that was kind of the thought behind it. So I kind of want to get into talking about that. Like, why did you do a film on the apocalypse?
Because I find the subject fascinating personally, and I like thinking about, like, society is very interesting to me. What holds us together? Because I look at society and I think that it's my personal feeling that there's like a small percentage of society actually is actively participating in it, and what they decide about things is what most of society accepts, and that is okay as long as that small group of people has some sense of ethics. I think at this point in our society, that small group of people has kind of written off the rest of society, and I just feel like we're in a situation where we're headed towards an inevitable collapse. We have an unsustainable way of approaching life. And part of it is bad ethics, and part of it is just the natural like speed of technology and the speed of like society and human nature. I mean, this is what happens. Like, human nature is cyclical, and we have societies that grow and become empires, and then they fall apart. And there's sort of like a weird, you know, I can look at people at old empires and say, you didn't know history because there wasn't Google. You know what I mean? Or there weren't encyclopedias.
Yeah.
Like, it's crazy to me that anybody now doesn't understand that this stuff is temporary. because we can look back at history and we have recorded, written accounts of the way empires that were supposedly infallible and completely indestructible fell in really dramatic manners. And so, to me, like, our sort of collective delusion about the permanence of the United States and the permanence of our way of life is interesting to me, because the only thing that we are assured of is what we all decide together moment by moment about how we're going to live. Like, we don't have a civilized society because we live in the U.S. We have a civilized society because we all decide not to be completely uncivilized. And we can all decide the opposite at any moment. And I think that's really interesting. And so to me, that's an interesting backdrop. And I think for us, me and Sarah as writers, we knew we had this location, and we were both interested in doing something that was kind of a relationship story, kind of like a Big Chill kind of movie, with a number of actors in an out-of-the-way location. And I personally love outpost movies. Like, I love The Thing. The Thing is a great film about a bunch of people out in the middle of nowhere who are a microcosm for society. And so for us, that was what we were interested in. Like, this is a microcosm for society where, you know, the way that we sort of ignore our problems and we live these false lives and we go under these assumptions that if we just don't talk about things, they'll go away, and we don't actually connect with each other and affirm our relationships every day and say, like, hey, we're not married because we signed a piece of paper 10 years ago. We're married because we're deciding every day that we're married. And to us, that was what was interesting about it. And that's the same thing that happens in society. We're not a society because of the Constitution. We're a society because every day we decide that the Constitution matters. And when we as a society stop deciding that the Constitution matters, that piece of paper becomes meaningless and our society falls apart. You know, it's like, it's a conscious affirmation of our previous inclination towards like an ethical way of life. And that we felt we could kind of tell that story with these people in their personal relationships and relate it to the broader society without actually looking at that broader society. Unfortunately, I think what's been interesting in the reaction to the film is that I don't think most people get that that's what this story is about. And that may be because we failed at doing it. You know, we may have done it badly and not really given enough signifiers about what we were talking about. Because, you know, the general criticism is like, this is a soap opera that has nothing to do with the apocalypse, which I get that. But, you know, the word apocalypse means to uncover from ancient Greek. And so, you know, when you have some event that occurs and you uncover what's underneath what we all look at, the surface, the sort of superficial that we live within, and you say, all right, we're going to take that away. What do you have now? You have human nature. You have your consciousness. You have your ethics. You have your relationships. That's what happens with this group of people in their little soap opera story. Like, the lies that they allow themselves to live with get taken away because they're all forced to sit in a house with each other for a few days. These little things that make us look at ourselves were interesting to us. And that's, to us, from a storytelling perspective, what's interesting about, you know, apocalyptic stories. Saying that, I'm also super interested in the prepping angle. Like, if one thing this reaction has taught me is that there is an audience out there for a serious, like, the world is ending, how do you prepare for it, what are you going to be dealing with, trials of survival movie. And there really isn't anything like that. And I think that's why people look at our film and expected it to be something that it wasn't and were disappointed. Because even if you look at like The Road or The Walking Dead or things that are really awesome films, they don't really deal with that thing of like, how does an individual trying to maintain his family or her family deal with those things. I don't know if you've seen anything like that, but there really isn't a movie like that. And I think there's definitely a desire for it.
Yeah, you know, I think sometimes some of that criticism might come from the fact that it's all about expectation, and being that I've put my own things out in the world, and when I get reviews that aren't necessarily the most favorable, it definitely, I think, tends to come from somebody that they'd heard about it and it was great, and that other person liked it, but so then they had this expectation it was going to be one way, and then when it wasn't the way that they imagined it, that somehow they feel cheated, or it just didn't own up to it. And I think that could be what might have happened. I enjoyed a lot of the movie, without a doubt. And the character James, I think, was that prepper. In fact, the reason he went to and set up his little compound, his little solar powered house, house on the hill, was because he knew things were going to come to an end. He mentioned that in the beginning of the movie. He always had that vision, correct? He was that character that was ready.
Yeah, I mean, I think so, but in a very San Francisco tech company, liberal urban dweller kind of way, which was all intentional. You know what I mean? Like, it's hilarious. Like, one of the biggest criticisms of the film is when people are like, it's completely crazy that this guy doesn't have a gun.
I was going to touch on that because firearms are nothing but tools to have. And if you think that the end is coming, wouldn't you want to add that tool to your tool shed, so to speak?
Dude, I'm with you. I mean, the closest perspective to my own in the movie is probably some combination of Laura and Becky. Like, those two, speak to me the most. And Laura saves the day with a gun. So basically, yes, James is anti-gun. And, the whole line, there's some line where, when Lev pulls out a loaded gun, and James is like, whoa, I can't believe you brought a loaded gun into my house. That drives people insane.
I have to admit, it drove me insane. Well, that was one scene. It was like that. It just runs contrary to a guy who's so prepared, so ready for the end of the world.
But James's thing is not like that. He's preparing to defend his homestead against people. His whole thing is can I separate myself from society? I believe that I can. He's quoting Walden at the beginning.
I see.
Which is about somebody who's going out and being like, I am going to live my own independent life. He's not thinking about defending anything. What he's thinking about in that moment is Hannah could have opened your satchel and found that gun, which is loaded and doesn't have a safety because it's a 1950s pistol, and killed herself. That's what's going through his mind. He doesn't think outside of his bubble, and in his bubble, a gun is dangerous. The fact is that, yes, there are people outside his bubble that he needs guns to defend himself against. We had a scene that we cut where, which we shouldn't have now looking at it, where, Nick, who's the, kind of wealthier guy, the rival to James, who's come to, and owns half of the house, and says, he's like, okay, so where are your guns? And James is like, we don't do things like that here, or we don't do things that way here. And Nick says, you will when somebody shows up with one. And that's and we cut that scene because we're like, well, that happens. We don't need to have them say it because we see it happen in action. And that's been the interesting thing to me in realizing the way people watch movies is that because a character says something doesn't mean the movie believes that. The movie very clearly believes that a gun is completely necessary because that is what is used to take Damon out, which is what saves the entire little micro society there. It's not a hippie film. The reason that, who knows if these people survive? Probably not, right? But the only reason that they're able to sort of come together at the end and try to have a community is because somebody, Laura, takes an action and takes out somebody who's clearly a threat. That you need to have leaders who have firepower, who use it in rational ways, but they can also talk to the community and say, you know what? We're not going to just kill each other. We're going to kill some people, but overall, we're going to try to work together. That's what the movie says. Just because a character says something different doesn't mean the movie believes that, which has been kind of the interesting thing to me. I think when we cut that scene between Nick and James, we felt like it was extraneous. Whereas, I think that scene would have said to people, oh, the movie doesn't think that this gun is a bad thing. James thinks the gun is a bad thing. It's really, I don't know if you've run into that with your books at all, but it's the only way you really tease out a philosophical question in fiction is to have characters disagree about things. And James is anti-gun. I mean, that line actually wasn't in the script. That line came from Adrian because I think when Lev brought the gun out, Laura sort of was like, give me that. because she knows Lev is kind of on planet Lev. And so Laura just takes a gun from him and is like, you shouldn't have that gun. I don't know where you got it. He says he found it. And she takes it because she actually knows how to use guns. So she takes it, and then she uses it later. And Adrian read the script and was like, you know what? If I was in this house and somebody brought a gun into it with my daughter, I would be mad at him. And I'm like, okay, cool. What would you say? He's like, I would say, I can't believe you brought a loaded gun into my house with my daughter. And I'm like, great, put it in the movie. And like that came entirely from Adrian's perspective on what his character valued, which was the inside of that bubble, right?
Yeah.
And it's interesting the way it gets pulled out and be like, oh, that's what the movie thinks. So not to go off on a tirade, but it's like I read these things and I'm like, I do wish I could just talk to the person who's saying it and be like, you don't get it.
No, I know exactly what you're going through. I mean, I've had those same kind of experiences with my books. When I write a scene, and being the writer of something, I mean, and all movies start with writing. You're writing that, you're creating it, where you have kind of what you're trying to say or what you're hoping the reader will pull out. And it's so fascinating. I can have one scene written, and it'll be several different responses to it.
Yeah.
How people receive it. And I mean, I've had some scenes where I've had people call me the biggest right-wing teabagger on the planet to the most leftist commie bastard out there. And it's just so interesting. It's like, wow, how do they receive that? What kind of person's reading that they would think that? And I've had that same thing as far as with some of the female characters, like, you don't even know how to write women, and you think that all women are idiots. And then in fact, I had a review the other day, and it was funny. It was like, this woman says, tell the author how to write women. All women are not idiots. And then that same day, I had an email from a female reader and says, oh my God, I just love the way you portray women in your books. And I shared both with my wife, and she goes, it's like, I can't win. It's just like, you can't win. You can't. You want everyone to like it, but the realities are not everyone's going to like everything that you do.
I have a friend who he has a blog that's pretty successful. It's called Green is the New Red. And it's basically about the way the government is going after environmental and animal rights activists as terrorists, and like using it as a way to like build like government power against any sort of dissent. And he has a bag that says, "Don't read the comments." And I think that's a good piece of advice. But so are you kind of like beyond the left right categorization thing?
As far as how I write my books or my characters, or
no, just you and like your perspective on the world and your politics and how you present things. Like, do you care about that stuff, or are you beyond that?
I do care about some things. I used to be much more involved kind of in a political aspect, probably 10 years ago plus, but I've kind of really drifted away from all of it. And my personal view is I look at the system now in Washington and think there's just if you look at the political party specifically, it's just two heads of one monster, so to speak. I think I don't have the beliefs that every single person that goes to DC or to Sacramento or even goes to our local city council are all bad people out to get us. But I do think there are some just people get power and they do bad things with it. I've never been this person that has I don't really prescribe to overall huge conspiracies that things are happening behind all these closed doors, only because I just look at government and sometimes think that they're so inefficient at doing things. How could they even pull off a conspiracy? But tons of conspiracies out there to end the way we live. I just think that I for one, believe when you were talking earlier in the interview, you hit right on. You were hitting points that I could agree with, and I think we are careening toward a collapse. I think that the way we are living our lives, the way it's not sustainable. I agree with you 100%. So to throw that back at you, how do you fit in that world? Are you left, right, or are you just kind of outside of all of that?
Oh, I just think all that stuff is distractions to keep us from, combining our dissatisfaction towards anything productive in society. I don't know if you're familiar with like Ralph Nader's new book, but he basically, wrote a book about how the left and right, as they're thought of in this country, have a lot in common and should really get together and actually change some things. And I certainly think that that's true. Like, I think most of the, I think the government has been very adept at using social issues to divide people into two different camps where they basically yell at each other about a bunch of nonsense that has nothing to do with politics or government in order to keep them from focusing on the things that actually there's general social, agreement about. And I'm, like I said, I kind of am in terms of this movie, I feel very connected to Laura and Becky, who are the sort of progressive liberal and libertarian Tea Party member. I think those two groups are have 90% in common in terms of the things that actually matter when it comes to politics. They may be different about I don't know, what books they like or what they think is appropriate to say in mixed company or whether or not they think drug use is good. But none of that really matters in terms of what we do as a society. It's not the thing that we can come together about and actually impact change, which, I mean, I think there's a great amount of frustration with the way that the government encounters problems, and there's a great amount of frustration with things from both sides. So I don't know. I see people I'm definitely somebody who likes Rand Paul more than Hillary. I'm definitely somebody who likes Ayn Rand. Grew up on her and love that ideology. But I'm also somebody who thinks that animal rights activists who are being called terrorists aren't. I think that that animals have consciousness just like humans do, or at least have interests, and shouldn't be exploited any more than human beings should be exploited. And so I guess that puts me on the sort of superficial progressive side of the scale. But I believe that because I believe that nobody should live for me and I shouldn't live for anybody, which is the Ayn Rand, code. And to me, that includes non-humans. I'm well, if I'm not expecting that anybody should own my body or own my life or tell me what to do, I shouldn't do that to anybody else either. And that's not just humans, that's the animals out there. So I don't know, I'm in a weird space, I guess, but I do think that we can actually make some pretty dramatic changes if we all find the things that we agree about.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And in some ways, I think that you're similar to many people out there in the essence that we, and that's why I think you see the independents, as far as people that are not identifying with any party continuously grow and grow and grow with each year. I just don't think people want to be put into or fit into a nice, neat box.
The power structure wants to do that. That's the thing. I mean, and they've been very, very, very good at it. And it's the MSNBC and the Fox mentality, that is not doing us any favors. Neither of those sides. That is not where our future lies. Because this is a great country and it belongs to the people who live in it. And I think that we have a responsibility to take control of this place, because losing this country would be a real shame. And I feel like that's the way we're headed, and I don't think it's necessary.
Yeah, I would absolutely agree with that. So when you were writing the movie, actually, I want to jump back because I had wrote a series of questions I want to ask, because I'm also fascinated by the filmmaking process. I've never been, ever been on a set anywhere or anything. But again, like I said, I'm a movie junkie. So, the characters that you had, you and the co-writer, Sarah's her name. Did I get that right? Are they inspired from people that you know?
Kind of. I mean, we sat around for a couple months and just talked about characters, because we initially conceived this as an improv movie where we were going to write, the characters out and then situations for each of the scenes, and then let the actors improv it. And we wrote a 70-page treatment that was like that, and our producer was just write the script, you guys. It's going to be so much easier. And she was right. We wouldn't have got the actors that we did if we had done an improv thing. But in order to get to that point, that's all we talked about was characters, and a lot of it was like, hey, I knew this one guy, who did this thing, and he was like this, and it was, there are compendiums of people that we know and experiences that we've had, and a little bit of ourselves thrown into all of them. And then, as you get past the point of just talking about people abstractly, and you say, okay, what are the situations that they're in? Then they start to devolve a little bit more from the real life counterparts, because you need them to have background traits that respond to the plot as opposed to just what's interesting. So I don't think anybody is directly somebody, but certainly everybody in the movie, the seeds come from people that we know or ourselves, for sure.
Okay. How long does it take to make a movie? I mean, from the concept where you all of a sudden had the idea to where people are then, I think it came out in April, correct? And then where people now can see the movie, its finished product. How long does that take?
This one was actually, for an independent film, relatively fast. We I think started working on the script in September of 2011. We finished it in February of 2012. We put the financing together and the casting and shot it in the summer of 2012. We took about 7 or 8 months to edit it, premiered it at the Los Angeles Film Festival in the summer of 2013, sold it to Samuel Goldwyn in Phase 4 shortly after that, and then they put it out in April of 2014. So from September of 2011 to when it actually comes out in April 2014, I guess that's 2.5 years. For an indie film, that's pretty quick. Bold Native, we wrote 2001, before 9/11, and didn't come out to 2008. So that was an 8-year process.
What took so long for Bold Native?
We tried a long time to get money for it and just couldn't find money for it. And eventually we made it. We paid for it ourselves, and we made it for $30,000. And it's really guerrilla. I mean guerrilla army, not gorilla the animal. And we just did that on our own. And so because we couldn't get anybody to give us money. With this one, the money came together through a couple of lucky coincidences, basically. And we were able to shoot within a few months of finishing the script. And then once you shoot, you have probably a year before it gets. Sometimes it can be quicker, somewhere between 5 months and a year till it hits the world in a festival. And then once somebody buys it out of a festival, there's another 8 or 9 months before it hits the real world. So regardless, you've got a couple years that you're putting into it.
Oh my God! That's a lot. I mean, so in between, are you working on something right now? We're working on a documentary that we've been working on for about 5 years, about a court case that's very complicated and deals with the government going after activists under terrorism laws. They were, animal rights activists, because that's the subject I care about, who were protesting an animal testing lab, and the people that the government prosecuted were never accused of doing anything other than speaking. They spoke positively about things that were illegal, like vandalism, but the government couldn't catch anybody who actually did the vandalism, so they instead went after the people who talked about it in public, which we all consider to be First Amendment activity. But the government said, you know what, this is actually incitement. Whereas incitement laws generally in the history of the Supreme Court have required immediate action, this was a whole different thing. So anyway, not to get into that, but we're working on that documentary. It's a long-term thing. And then I'm writing a new script, and then, we do a lot of internet content and little things like that in between. But, when we were working on Goodbye World, it's it's a full-time job for a couple years. You put a lot of yourself into a movie, and, like I said, it's like a kid. It's exactly like having children. You put years and years into them, and you pour your heart and soul into them, and then they go out in the world, and they have a life that has nothing to do with you. And you have to completely learn how to say,
you're now your own thing, and people are going to take you however they take you, and good luck. And not get too invested in it because it'll drive you crazy.
Oh, I know. I was thinking about, I know how much time goes into writing a novel, but I couldn't imagine the production time. That's that amount of time. I'm a pretty prolific guy that I would go crazy if it would take me 2, 3, 4 years to put one book at a time. And if I was George R. R. Martin, but then again, his books are like 1,000 pages in length. But that's a lot. I mean, that's just a lot of energy, a lot of passion, a lot of work. I mean, I absolutely appreciate it, and that's why anyone that sees the movie, if people, they love it, and then there's people that would have criticism of it. I just understand the amount of energy and time a filmmaker puts into that. And this is out to all the listeners out there. It's a lot of work. So I would always ask people to keep that in mind. I would like readers to do the same thing when they read my books. Just, we sit and we toil for months and months on end, and so don't rip us apart too badly.
Well, that's nice of you, but you know as well as I do, Jeff, that the reality is that none of that matters. But the fact is that, I don't begrudge anybody having a strong opinion about whatever gets put out there because, that's what it is. It's like that's the life we've chosen, and if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. That's it. It doesn't work. It doesn't work for you. It's somehow I didn't do my job. And I think that certainly there's things that I could have done better on this movie. I think it doesn't speak to everybody, and you learn, and next time, that criticism is helpful for the next time you go out there, right? I don't know if you find it helpful or if you just find it not helpful, what you hear from people about the things you're writing.
Yeah, well, I hear from people positive and negative, and I do read all of them, and I do try. I say, what I said, it's. I mean it, but at the same time, I'm fully aware of that. The ship has sailed, so to speak, and I embrace everybody's criticisms of anything that I've done. So, and I do honestly try to take whatever, if the negative, and try to look at it and make it constructive, and try to if there's something I can change. I did, I watched the movie back in April, and then I just watched it again on Netflix, and. The one character that I kind of liked his development was Benji, and I kind of wanted to know more about him, and I wanted to know more about. That's one thing that I think readers have with books as well as they have. You see these characters move on, and you're like, I wonder what happens to them. Yeah. And when they take off on the bike, I was like, I wonder what happens to them.
I think Benji and Becky if I ever made a sequel to this movie, it would be about them, and it would be a crazy Mad Max, like it would be Benji and Becky like fighting their way through some, scumbags out in the world, because I think both of them, what they have in common is that they both think that there is such a thing as an ethical way to live your life, and that it's worth sacrificing in order to maintain that, and that there is no compromise when it comes to that. And I think they both care about others more than they care about themselves, which is something that I think is true about, both those political, ideological points of view that they kind of represent. And, they would just go out there and, like, kick ass. So I'd totally watch that movie.
Yeah, I would too. I was like, I wonder where they're going to go, and I was hoping, because I did, the first time I watched it, I was hoping that there would be some scene where they were rolling into some kind of situation, and then maybe it fades. But again, that's where I was just having, it's like that would be kind of cool, But I had my own images of kind of where they went and what they were doing.
I love that. I wish you should have read the script, man. We could have added that scene.
As far as the event that occurs, and by the way, I'm the big believer. It's never really the event, and actually, you kind of say that, and it's you say that perfectly, and I've said that on my program. I tell it to readers all the time that it's not the real event that brings about the apocalypse. It's how we respond to it. It's how us human beings decide to treat one another that actually is the apocalypse. That's what brings down society, because the power can go out, the lights can go, can turn off, things can stop working, or bomb can go off. But it's it's how we react to it is what brings about the downfall in a lot of ways. And when you did it and you chose kind of the cyber attack, why the cyber attack? Do you think it's something that's a real scenario, science, fact-based scenario that could occur?
Well, it's, I agree with you completely, and I think it's not just that it's the society's reaction, but I think it's a multiple event kind of thing. It's not just the cyber attack; it's the fact that there are semi-trucks being blown up coming into cities, and so cities are not letting semi-trucks in, and semi-trucks are how we get materials from one place to another. And Los Angeles, for instance, only has 3 days worth of food in it. And so if you stop the transport of goods in and out of urban areas, you're going to create chaos in urban areas. And I think that if you have a situation where there's a cyber attack and there's some targeted bombs in semi-trucks, then people who aren't, thinking of the bigger picture that are administering cities will say, hey, no more semi-trucks. You can't come in here. And maybe that leads to things. Like, to me, it had to be multiple things at the same time. And we talked about a lot of different things. It could be like a Katrina-type natural disaster at the same time that there's some other disaster. If you have, like, our society can handle a Katrina, it can handle a Ferguson, it can handle a whatever. But let's say, in addition to Ferguson, there was also a Katrina at the same time. And let's say at that same time, there was also a terrorist attack, a 9/11 at that same time. Then you have people looking around and saying, I don't know what's going on. I need to be more, protective of, and that's kind of what you're saying. It's people's reaction to the nature of uncertainty. And whether or not the media is leading people to say, hey, that's something happening over there, or that's something that's going to affect you. And to our mind, like, if there was just a few things going on at the same time, in our all spring from the same unknown assailant. The cyber attack and the physical attacks come from the same assailant, which we don't identify. But it's just somebody who's linked into that idea that a couple things at the same time could be the tipping point to get people to start thinking more about themselves and the community. And that's the thing that starts to then rip the community apart.
Why? How come you didn't identify the assailant?
Because our characters don't know who it is, and this is a subjective film. Like, for us, once we're with them, and that sense of uncertainty that they have is where we wanted to live. Like, both to the extent that they could not know and not think about it because they don't have a television. They don't have these things. Like, they can pretend like nothing's going on out there, which is what they choose to do, which is what we all choose to do in certain circumstances, most of us, right? We pretend like nothing's happening other than, oh, what's the new taco at Taco Bell? And, what football team is winning? And, gee, what is Britney Spears saying today? Or whatever, like, we can care about all that stuff instead of things that are actually impacting our future. Until we can't. And so we wanted to be with them. And, I think that was the theme of the movie for us, is to, like, they're isolated. They don't have to think about this. And so they choose not to. But that's an unsustainable point of view, which is proven in the film. Like, the soldiers, they'll go away once because Damon is like, you know what? We'll fight this another day. He's not going to, he's like, I guess I could just kill everybody at this house with my gun. He could have done that at that moment, but that doesn't make a lot of sense. Like, why do that? When he knows, like, in a week, he can come back and they'll be begging for his help, potentially. You know what I mean? I think he's, like, there's a sense that, like, you can pretend that you can live in this fantasy world for a little while. And so we wanted to be with them there. And I think that not knowing where it came from lets you not care where it came from. And that's kind of where they are, because it doesn't impact them. So
yeah, and I think not really having any of them see anything, now this was my take on it, was kind of some of the reason why some of the characters seemed detached from it. Right. Because they weren't actually witnessing it.
Exactly. Like the ones like Benji saw stuff and Laura saw stuff, and they're not detached. Whereas Lily, everybody talks about how Lily is like she just wants to smoke pot.
I know.
She doesn't. She's not seen anything. She doesn't know what it's like. You know what I mean? She wasn't out there.
Yeah, and so
like,
it's not.
You're right. You're absolutely right.
So it's not real for her then. It's not real for her then. And
exactly.
Yeah.
And so Benji is actually having a thing where he's like, wow, you know, like this is really happening out there. And so when Ariel is like, this is amazing, society's falling apart, he's like, you know what? It's actually, this is kind of bad too. I mean, I wanted this, but people are really in trouble. Like, and he's having that like consciousness of like, wow, I've gotten what I wanted. Do I really want it? How am I going to react to it? Am I going to like just sit here and like smoke pot and have sex? Or am I going to get on my bike with somebody who gives a shit about the world and go out there and do something? And I think that that's where he comes to.
Yeah, you know, he reminded me of, you know, people that have commented before on the apocalypse where, you know, I've had people like, well, I can't wait till something like this happens. This would be great. And I'm always the kind of person that sits back. Well, for one, I think it is coming. That we will see some kind of decline. And I like how you put it earlier. Is like history is full of declines of great nations, of empires that were born, they rose, and then they collapse. And you know, there's without a doubt that we're on some kind of path. Where we are on that, that's obviously up for debate. But we're somewhere on that path. You know, and I always try to temper people's thought on that. It's like, well, you might want something to happen, but what does that mean? It's because I think people think that, oh, I've got this or I've got that, I will survive that. I don't think people really truly understand what an apocalyptic or a total collapse would be like, because really very few people have ever experienced it to ever really pull from a realization of it. And then if there was a complete collapse, say, of the government, that creates a power vacuum. And there's always this assumption that the good guy will win, or their side will be victorious. And that's not always the case. And that's why I always temper people. It's like, you might want this, but once it starts happening, you might go, shit, this is not what I wanted. Then it's too late.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I see from your bio that you're a veteran. So, like, you know, I think that perspective, somebody who's actually been in the military, actually been around combat, has a much better perspective on the fact that it's not cheery, you know?
No, and there's no guarantee. There's no guarantees, none. And nothing ever works out like you plan it to. I was talking to somebody else about that, and it was like, you know, and that's one of the reasons I sometimes can't prescribe to, you know, some of these very vast conspiracies, because even a simple military operation, something always goes wrong. Something doesn't work out. Specifically, the more characters, I mean, you know, the more people you add to, you know, to an operation, the greater you increase the chances of it going wrong. Because human beings are fallible. We're going to fail. We're going to turn left when we should have turned right. So it won't turn out exactly like you think it will. So
yeah, that's true, and it's I mean, I think it's the reason that people are excited about it or positive about it is just that there's such a frustration with the level of superficial nonsense right now. You know, that's my take, at least. I just, like, people would like that to go away. So maybe we can get rid of some of that without, you know, everybody dying. It'd be good.
You know, I mean, I still am an optimist and I think that we can still come together and prevent and bring things back where our system of government works for us. I know there are some people that are listening now, there might be in the chat room that says, it's all gone, there's nothing we could do, tear it down. I'm like, well, if you're going to tear it down, what are you going to replace it with? And the fact is, when you tear something down, you're destroying something. Destroying takes violence, and in violence there's bloodshed. And then what's the outcome? And it's not guaranteed. So I always like to temper people when they're all about tearing it down, bring the system down. Like, okay, do you have a plan to what you're going to put in place? That's why I always want to ask them, and I always find out they typically don't. They're all about just destruction of it, not about the building up from it. So, well, we're kind of running in at the top of the hour. Dennis, why don't you tell everybody again, kind of where they can where they can see your movies, where they can reach out and talk to you, email you, website, etc.
Goodbye World is on Netflix right now. So if you are a subscriber to Netflix streaming, you can watch it there. If you're not, it's on iTunes and Amazon and DVD at Walmart and a lot of Redbox. Bold Native is for free at boldnative.com. That's BOLDNATIVE.com. And Rock the Bells, our documentary on the Wu-Tang Clan, is, I think, on Netflix, but only as a DVD. So that's where that stuff is.
Well, Dennis, I really appreciate your time you spent with me tonight. It's fascinating to learn more about the movie and the process of filmmaking. I'm actually going to go check out Bold Native next. Where can I watch that?
You can watch that for free at boldnative.com on it's a Vimeo link. So, and if the DVD is available as well there, but if you want to just stream it online for free, it's there. It's in HD, yeah, that's the place to watch that.
And then, what about Rock the Bells?
That is you can get that through iTunes if you want to watch it on your computer. You have to rent it or buy it, and you can also get the DVD through Netflix. It's not on Netflix streaming. And yeah, that's if you're into like events and that kind of thing, you'll be into it. You don't actually need to be into hip hop to be into that movie, even though it's about a hip hop festival. There's only maybe like 6 or 10 minutes of music in it. It's mostly like what it takes to put on a big event. So it's more like Woodstock in terms of the way it unfolds.
Got it. All right. Well, Dennis, again, thank you very much. Everyone, check out his films. Check out Goodbye World. It's on Netflix. All right, Dennis, thanks a lot.
Thanks, Jeff. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. And everybody, we're getting ready to hit the top of the hour here. So until next week, I want everybody to stay frosty out there.